Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We're just going to give a couple of minutes for any latecomers joining us. Hello, welcome, welcome, welcome. More people joining. Hello, welcome. Hello, welcome to everyone just joining. We'll give another 30 seconds for any latecomers, and then we will kick off. If you are returning to this webinar and you've seen any of our other webinars, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining. Hello, welcome everyone. Okay, I think that's enough time. Let's kick off. Thank you so much to everyone that's come and welcome. Hello, Joe. Today we are talking everything red teaming. If you're not familiar with Bulletproof, our mission statement is very, very simple. We make cybersecurity simple yet effective. We specialize in everything cybersecurity, data protection, and information security. But today we're talking everything red teaming, real world lessons from red team operations, testing the unthinkable. Sounds like a bit of a James Bond title, and introducing Bulletproof's very own James Bond is Dominic Mortimer. How are you doing, Dom?
Right, all good. Thank you for the intro. Apologies if you hear a dog bark in the background. Suddenly decided to speak up.
No, totally fine. And Dom, give us the next slide, please. But it'd be great to do a little sort of 30-second introduction on yourself, maybe what we're going to get out of today's webinar, and I suppose we'll go from there.
Yeah. So I'm Don Mortimer. I'm the red team lead at Bulletproof. I've been knocking around the IT industry now for probably a little over 11 years. Started kind of, I guess, at the bottom from like low-level tech and help desk up to system engineer and system admin for a large Russell Group university. And then about 5 years ago, 5 and a bit years ago now, transitioned into penetration testing, and very quickly after that into red teaming. And that's pretty much where I've sat for sort of the last 4 years. So Bulletproof itself as well are a Crest Star organization. So we deliver both regulated and unregulated red teams across DORA, TIBA frameworks, and then also under the STAR framework as well for sort of the non-regulated industry, and along with classic kind of red teaming. And my day-to-day here is pretty much leading the service. So coming up with different ways of doing things, staying up to date with all the latest frameworks, and then also operating and delivering on the red teams as well. So not just a pencil pusher, also do the engagements myself as well. And we operate those across numerous sectors. It's one of the bonuses here at Bulletproof. We're not 100% in the financial sector and regulated. We're also across retail, CNI, banking, insurance. Like we've pretty much probably over the years covered most sectors. And yeah, I think that's enough about me. But in kind of today's talk, we'll go through sort of the about and what it is in a minute, but we're just going to be looking at hopefully some key takeaways that you can use if you're already doing red teaming, if you're thinking about red teaming, and kind of what red teaming is in terms of two sort of core areas. So yeah, hopefully you enjoy listening to me ramble on, and I'll try not to be too monotonous.
Thanks, Dom. Next slide, please. We're very conscious to make sure we get Q&As in as well. So if you have questions, don't wait till the end. We have a Q&A session at the end, but please just throw them in the chat. You'll see at the top of our meeting here, there's a Q&A box, and I'll try and find the appropriate time to drop those questions in. Before we get going, Dom, Ian Rawlinson says, Dom, I saw Dom at the cyber conference in Brum. He did a great speech, really insightful. Without making your head any bigger than it's going to need to be after this webinar, Dom. Okay, so what is red teaming? Red teaming is a realistic threat simulation that tests how well organizations can detect and respond to sophisticated attacks. In regulated sectors, it follows standards like TIBA EU or CBEST. In non-regulated environments, it's used to assess resilience against real-world threat actors across people, processes, and technology. Now, before we dive in Dom, tell me maybe, I suppose, the difference between like your standard pen test that people do every year and sort of tick box exercise against red teaming. Is pen testing just a snapshot in time of your environment against red teaming? That is, we're going to assess real time and how your business and people and processes react. Have I got that right? Or I suppose summarize it for me.
So one of the key advantages of red teaming probably over penetration testing is that detection and response and resilience testing. So red teaming really focuses in on what matters to you as a company and what makes you tick. So when we talk later about objectives and things like that, red teams go after specific objectives. We don't do the same thing as penetration testing where we're looking for vast coverage of a certain scope. We want to go after and show impact to your key systems, your key functions, what makes you tick as an organization, and assess in depth how we can go from external in some cases all the way through to showing sort of CIA triad based attacks against your key systems and what that looks like. So that's a very basic differentiator, but yeah, we're much more focused on learning as well.
Okay. All right, thanks, Dom. Next slide, please. I'm sure we're going to lift the lid on this a little bit. So grab a coffee. We've got this session's in for about an hour, so we'll finish just before 1, and again we'll have a bit of time for Q&A. Not much about me. I'm head of new business here at Bulletproof. The team here are fantastic. A whole team of consultants well placed to answer any questions you've got. So whether it's about red teaming or any other cyber services we offer, feel free to get in touch afterwards, and we'll have a couple of QR codes for you to scan if you'd like. Today's agenda, we're going to look at different types of red teaming, because there are different types, and that Dom works to. Recipe for success, scenario bases, so what next, and as I said, a Q&A at the end. So next slide, please, Dom. I'm going to hand over to yourself. I'm going to stop waffling and let you take the stage.
Thank you. So yeah, just again on that Q&A, don't feel like if we don't get a chance to answer your questions during this engagement that you can't this talk, then feel free to reach out. We're not someone that's going to shine a light in your eyes and make you buy a red team before we deal with you. We'd like to have open conversations. If you're planning stuff, you've got things in the future, like we can always put half an hour aside just to discuss things through. So moving on, types of red teaming. There are many different types, and probably kind of sub-services that we offer within red teaming, particularly here at Bulletproof, and you may see them around in other providers as well. There's a QR code just up there in the top, which takes you to our main sort of service page for what our kind of red team services are made up of. But today we're going to be focusing on the kind of classic red teaming approach. If you're going out there looking for red team, you're not in a regulated space, you just want to improve your detection and response capabilities, you want to make sure you're more resilient, those kind of red teams. And then the other side of that being the threat-driven red teams or the threat-led penetration testing. Again, industry probably not helping itself out there in terms of differentiation between penetration testing and red teaming, but TLPTs or threat-led penetration testing is something that's kind of becoming more and more popular, not just across the regulated space, who've kind of been doing it for the last 5-10 years. So your classic red teams, they usually would be kind of full chain coverage. So when we talk about full chain or full attack chain coverage, we're looking from external vectors to internal vectors to your impact scenarios, then wrapping up at the end. So one of the bonuses of the classic red team as well is we can be considerably more flexible than with some of the structured frameworks. So for smaller organizations, we can then start to look into things like assumed reach, maybe removing that external, that initial access phases to scale things down, make it more affordable, make it more targeted. And this in itself also allows us to, in some cases, be more creative and novel. So with the classic red team, we tend to say you're looking at this as you're hiring Bulletproof to attack your organization. We will use our expertise and our judgment to do that. Whereas within threat-driven red teams, you're often hiring a security provider to put on the face mask of a threat and attack your organization in the context of that threat. So slightly different, some more flexibility, but the good frameworks, Tiber, CBEST, etc., do offer the ability for the red team to be more creative and add their own scenarios, but it's definitely something we can probably do a bit more of and be more flexible with classic red teaming. In both types, we very much look into and focus in on testing your detection and response capabilities, how well you're able to detect us, how well you're able to remove us from the environment, prevent us from continuing attack chains, and how locked down and protected those kind of key systems are. And with the classic red teams, there's no direct requirement for threat intelligence or full threat intelligence phases. But we here do like to make sure we're contextualizing both within our reports and our findings and approaches what we're doing with the real world. So it just helps make things a bit more grounded. So we're not pulling weird techniques kind of out of thin air that have never been seen or might not ever be done or are very, very niche. We're applying real world tactics to these engagements. And then the other side of the coin, you've got the threat-led penetration testing or threat-driven red teams. These are primarily delivered within regulated environments. So this will be under the DORA scheme, TIBA, CBEST, GBEST, STAR, etc. These, again, 99.9% of the time are going to be full spectrum. So this is full external to internal, covering the entire kill chain, because that's kind of what they're there for. You want to see how your organization reacts to a threat at all stages. They are highly structured, and the documentation and guidance around implementing them, procuring them, and what you should expect is fantastic. The new TIBA guidance in particular is very, very good. So I'd recommend kind of checking it out. There's a link for it, I think, on the last slide as well. But basically, this highly structured approach is great because you, as a procurer of the service, know exactly what you're going to be getting. You're going to know exactly what the output should be at given stages, and it can make things really, really smooth to deliver. So as when your provider knows what they're doing, it can make for a really good engagement. And again, testing, detection, and response. And these ones are heavily driven by threat intelligence. So here at Bulletproof, we work with a TI provider who carries out the entire threat intelligence phase, who is separate to Bulletproof. They act as a kind of third party, a good barrier between your actual red team and your TI. And we work together to design and build realistic scenarios that are reflective of threats facing your organization sector at a given time. So that's the kind of different types. Any questions on those?
Tom, I was going to ask, DORA, the TIBA compliance, is that operating in any specific spaces or sectors?
Financial. So yeah, so TIBA and DORA are both probably things people are becoming more and more familiar with now. So the TIBA EU framework is the threat-led penetration testing framework used to deliver red team engagements against the European financial markets. And DORA, the new Resilience Act, has kind of come in and adopted TIBA as its approved delivery method for its threat-led penetration testing. So when you're doing a DORA engagement, when you're looking for a DORA threat-led penetration test, you will be having a TIBA-based threat-led penetration test. So cool. Moving on. So recipes for success. So one of the things I kind of said today is that we're going to be looking at what kind of key takeaways we've seen over the years that people should be considering when they're doing red team engagements. And probably the number one for everyone that they should consider and be doing well is planning. You know, it's one of those things everyone kind of groans about, and us as operators, we're like, well, when do we get to do the hacking? No, we got to do the planning and make sure everything's set up. So it always boils back to that. If you correctly set up your engagements, you plan properly, and they're really well executed, you will get the exact results you want and more, and everything will go really, really smoothly. So I won't dive into every single point in detail and bore you all to death, but I'll just kind of group them together. So probably the first 4 or 5 are quite closely linked. So defining clear objectives and knowing your why, they may appear to be ultimately the same thing as well. My objectives are my why, right? Not quite. So when we talk about defining clear objectives, this is exactly what we kind of dig into during the scoping and proposal phases when we're talking about what makes your business tick. You know, is it certain data stores? Is it personal information? Is it intellectual property? Is it manufacturing capabilities? You know, distribution capabilities? What does that look like for your business? If these services were impacted, what would that cost you? You know, without kind of jumping on the bandwagon, but it's something that's in everyone's mind at the moment because it's in the news. You look at M&S and all the recent breaches. You know, when we take scenarios and build something around those events, those clear objectives might be to evaluate like how good your kind of service desk processes are, and people impersonating service desks. Are you using, you know, internal admin tools? If they were to compromise in the case of M&S, like your VMware infrastructure and your payment processing systems, like they would be your clear objectives, your key objectives. Like, can we impact your payment systems? Can we impact your distribution systems? Stuff like that. and testing them and how we do that. So knowing that and going into a brief of what your objectives are really helps us build clear scenarios. Knowing your why isn't necessarily directly linked to your objectives, which seems counterintuitive, but your why is, why are you doing a red team? Is it regulatory? You have to adhere to it. You have to follow these frameworks. Is it improvement? Is it more about learning? And say you have an internal security team and you want to upskill them. You want to put them through realistic drills to make their thought processes and their incident handling better and understand where they are. Or are you currently doing an amazing job? You know, we've worked with some clients who have gone through breaches in the past and have turned everything around and are now absolutely, you know, top notch in terms of their prevention capabilities. And do you want to showcase that and make sure it is at the standard you think it is? And that is your why. And if you can come to us and explain your why, why you're doing it, what you want to get out of it, it helps us not only tailor your engagement, but our reporting output, our language, focus points, what we want to do and show. And it can really help you get like the most amount of value out of your engagement. Scoping and rules of engagement, kind of self-explanatory. Red teams operate over a wide scope. Your rules of engagement might be dictated by, you know, risk to life systems, certain things we can do, can't do, and these can often align with threat intelligence as well. So, you know, certain threat actors might do things in certain ways, which might limit how we approach an engagement. Engaging with key stakeholders and start planning early. One of the best ways we've seen of getting buy-in within organizations and making people feel part of it is to include them early and include those people who manage those critical systems as part of it. So the test isn't happening to them, they're part of it. You know, they get to influence how we do things. And I think another red teaming organization described it very, very well in that you guys as the client and the control group and the organization are the puppet masters of the red team. So you dictate how we do things, what we want to be looking at and how we approach things. And during the engagement, you can steer us, help us, or, you know, direct us to do things, look into certain areas in greater detail, create scenarios, because you know your business, you know what you're worried about and you know your risks, so you can help us. Planning for blue team involvement and preparing for operational impact. You know, your blue team will have to be involved at some point. You know, Tiber and DORA frameworks, for example, focus on like purple teaming in the closure phases. So getting them involved, getting them engaged with it is again a really, really good thing. And we always want to have those learning actions and learning outputs of a red team. How we're going to make the team better, you know, doing debriefs. Can we dive into it? Can we give you guys information, insider tips and tricks that can help reinforce your organization? Operational impact as well. In some cases, both regulated and unregulated, there may be demand for scenarios like ransomware simulations and things like that. How are you going to do them safely? If we're implementing or interacting with payment systems in order to see how far we can go, what information do you need to give us so that we can do it safely and manage the risk on it and do all that? So operational impact, always try to avoid it, but always be aware of the risks and make sure they're mitigated and there's plans in place of how to handle that. And the best to last, plan for post-test activities. Make sure you guys have the time after the engagement, not only to implement the changes and the information we provide you, but also to use us while you have us to learn from. You know, during the engagement, we share everything we're doing. So ensuring you can digest that information, ask questions, ask for replay actions, dig into how we're doing things, understand our thought processes and why we did things can really, really, really maximize the return you get from a red team. So make sure your teams, yourselves have all the time you can to use us and get the, like, absolutely squeeze the most amount of value out of us.
Dom, I've got a question just on the engaging key stakeholders, early planning. In your eyes, what sort of best case and best practice, if I'm a business leader or a technical leader, how many people do you bring into that field division? Do you involve in the scoping process, and how many do you just keep this completely anonymous to them? You know, what engagements have you done that you see the best results from? Is it just keeping it to just the technical leads, the business leaders?
We always ask for like minimum essential involvement, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So nearly all of the red teams are carried out in a covert manner. So those who need to know and need to be involved are in it. But what we need to have is clear decision makers within that process. So a good example is when you're doing your risks and everything, to have, say, head of SOCs or head of services who know it's going on but aren't feeding that back to their team. So when we hit a situation where someone's like, right, we need to ring the police about this, there's clear like de-escalation processes we can follow. And likewise, people who know those systems really well. So if we're having to interact, say, Swift banking systems and how your transactions happen, if they're available and can provide us with information, we can make sure what we're doing is safe and how we're testing those systems is correct, basically. So it's a hard one, a minimum involvement, but the right people.
Ian Rulson asks, what about if you're missing risks you have not scoped?
So missing risks. So they should present themselves. And again, that's why we kind of say build those objectives. So if there's risks and attack paths, you don't need to consider like every possible thing we might be doing. We'll find them probably quite naturally by trying to go for those objectives. You know, quite often we see people being like, you know, Active Directory is a critical part of our system. We want to make sure that's tested and evaluated. It's like, yes, it is obviously like an underpinning service, but what it allows access to is probably more important than Active Directory itself. So a good example would be, you know, our financial systems are really, really important. People can't make changes to our CRM platforms, all of this stuff. If we as an attacker can get in and compromise, say, Bob in a really low ranking position within the organization, doesn't do very well in his phishing assessments, all those kind of things, can compromise him and move directly to CRM platform and pull information and exfiltrate all this information without ever having to do an exploit or privilege escalate or whatever. That is a risk you probably haven't considered. You probably considered locking down everything, but maybe your missions aren't great. So we should start to explore those risks quite naturally. So as long as you know your whys, what your objectives are, it's down to us to kind of show the risks and impacts and how we get there, if that makes sense.
Right. Okay, I think we can move on to the next slide.
Perfect. Leveraging threat intelligence. So not all threat intelligence is created equal. Many of you probably might subscribe to various feeds, RSS feeds, and loads of platforms include threat intelligence, which might just be a massive dump of information about stuff going on in your sector, against similar organizations, etc. But the primary best use for threat intelligence is taking it, ingesting it, and contextualizing it to your organization. So again, coming back to the M&S breach, jumping on that bandwagon, you take that, their approaches they use there. So, you know, they impersonated service desk, they removed MFA, they use common sysadmin tools and everything to privilege escalate, and then eventually use ransomware upon like your VMware host. So, you know, you could take that information, say you're within the retail sector, and you say, okay, this is how those threats have operated. What are our key systems? So are we using like hypervisors and virtualization? How secure are they? And then also contextualize that to how secure are user processes in terms of being contacted by unknown service desk people. So you're taking something that's happened, this intelligence, this event, you're contextualizing it to your business, and then you're mapping it against impact to key systems that you have. And once you have this, you can then very easily design a really good scenario to evaluate how effective your defenses are against these types of attacks. And this is like that in itself is taking an idea, taking an approach, and then contextualizing it and mapping it. And that is fundamentally what you should be using threat intelligence for. It's great to know all these things going on, but if you're not using it, what's the point? So on that kind of threat intelligence piece as well, and when we do these engagements, we don't follow it like a checklist. So say, for example, you know, one of your threats is a low-level ransomware group. They use PowerShell all the time and blah, blah, blah. And you guys are operating on a really high maturity level. You've got a great SOC, EDR, SIEM, 24/7 monitoring, all that stuff. If we feel the threat intelligence you're providing us with, or a provider is providing us with, isn't relevant to your organization, like it's just going to get caught instantly and you're going to get a warm, fuzzy feeling and potentially like a full sense of security, it's down to us as the provider to realize that's not going to be relevant. We need to adapt our approaches or approach this in a different way. And that's where our adaptation and kind of knowledge in sector comes in. And yeah, like I said, not everything's created equal. Make sure you're leveraging open source and paid feeds. For those who have been through the regulated space, things like Tiber engagements, DORA engagements, and have seen full threat intelligence, targeted threat intelligence reports, you will see the massive difference between just an RSS feed of information compared to an organization taking that information and focusing it, like shining the light on your organization and saying what's most likely approach is, how realistic and how likely certain threat groups, certain nation states are likely to be targeting your organization. They are like night and day differences. And again, all about turning that intelligence into action. It's all good looking at it and going, oh, that's cool. But if you're not using it to guide your approaches, what's the point? And as with everything with Red Team, we kind of say it's brilliant in this continual loop. So you're taking your threat intelligence, you know what's going on in your sector, you're applying it to scenarios, you're testing them. Then afterwards, you're doing follow-up engagements or replay actions of your red team engagements or key areas of threat intelligence, new emerging threats into purple teams. And then guess what? You just keep doing that again and again and again. And you'll find the resilience and the improvements in your organization don't just kind of creep up. They will properly jump up. It's a really, really, really good way of doing it. Questions on that?
I suppose the one that comes to mind for me is, and something we get asked all the time in the sales team, it's justifying the ROI of a project like this, Dom. And I suppose what you were just speaking to lends itself to that. It's the takeaways and the learnings of this, right? And we see leaders all the time going, oh, well, why do I need this? And it's only after the fact or after an incident's taken place that they come back and say, okay, so that's the ROI. That's why we spend this in the first instance. Can you talk a little bit to that on, maybe questions that might get posed around ROI justifying the spend of a project like this?
Yeah, everyone kind of considers it as a background thing until the worst sort of happens. But if you know you're offering a high level of protection and you're confident in your abilities against known threats in your sector, that in itself doesn't inherently return instant value to your organization, us being a cost center rather than a revenue generator, but it will allow you to operate. If you look at the impacts and costs again, taking M&S, what was it, 680 million they lost in share prices in the first couple of hours after the breach was announced. Millions of pounds in operational costs getting back online, millions of pounds of doing that. It's a case of saying, that's your what if, let's test if it can happen, and also lock down any ways they can do it and evaluate how well we respond to those situations. Likewise with your recovery as well. We've done scenarios, red team scenarios, where we've fully tested recovery and failover of key systems, within certain environments, how feasible it is, how possible it is under pressure, and what it looks like. So there's many ways we can do that. And then also the other side of the coin being, a lot of organizations spend potentially millions of pounds on MDR, SOC, EDR prevention, and all of that stuff. And they buy it once and they're like, well, that's working in the background, but don't validate or improve it. And that's again where we sit in, be it if you've got a third party SOC provider, we don't care. We work with them in the exact same way. We elevate them. We want to make them better at protecting your specific organization. And a lot of these SOC providers have huge client bases, and they can pull on the information and things they've learned from different groups to improve everyone. But likewise, your organization is going to be unique in how it does and its risks, and we can help make sure they're doing the best possible job for you and offering the best possible protection for your key systems.
Thanks, Dom.
All good.
We're about halfway through, just to give it for a time check.
Perfect. Keep my rambling in check. So bringing it all together and building a valuable scenario. So we've kind of touched on all of these points. So, at this stage, you've done your planning really well. You know your whys, you know what you're expecting out of the engagement. You're using your threat intelligence and you're aligning your scenarios with your business risk. You're emulating real threats, things that have been seen in the real world that genuinely apply to your business, your operation model. You've chosen your clear objectives, your scope of works, your proposals, all of your rules of engagement. You're nicely balancing your realism with control. And again, this is where ROI comes into in costing. We have a lot of clients come to us and say, we want you to be as stealthy as you can be, and we've got top level EDR running. We want you to bypass everything and be really quiet. Oh, and by the way, we want you to do it in 2 weeks. It's like those two are not entirely possible. You've got to make sure you're balancing your realism with actual controls and stipulations put on you by your organization and by the engagement itself. So it's down to us to kind of build the scenario that balances that realism with what's expected. So yeah, try and bear that in mind as well. Where possible, we always encourage people to include the full kill chain, just because it does show everything. It can make a really nice attack chain scenario, showing everything going through your wins and losses across all phases, from external access all the way to your impact scenarios. And again, that's a key differentiator between penetration testing and red teaming. We also show what goes wrong. We show what goes, and by going wrong, I mean for us as a red team attacking you or as a threat attacking you. If you excel in certain areas, it will shine in the report alongside the things you need to improve. We don't just give you a list of 400 actions and issues and expect you to go and fix them. You also have clear evidence of where things are working really well. We really like bang on about cross-team learning, and the best engagements we've had have the most engagement from the client. We want you to be part of the engagement. We want you to learn from it. We want to share as much information as we can about how we're doing things, the root causes, how we do things, and allow you to tune your prevention detection capabilities as best they can against real threats. So, use us, put us in front of teams you want to, have us spend a day with a team, and, train them, go through the reports, do replays, use us for whatever you want. If you ask us to do it and include it, we will. Specific test goals, again, we've talked about objectives, keeping them realistic, keeping them focused. And again, that will drive down the kind of wide scope. If you're keeping really nice, concise objectives, it makes our lives easier and we know what we're going for. Assume breach versus full kill chain, again, comes back to that balance of realism. Replayable scenarios. So, can you easily retest? Can your SOC, for example, can your provider retest some of these scenarios? Are we giving you enough information that you can retest these scenarios and make sure improvements and changes you're making are showing as closed, basically? And probably again, best or last, plan for outcomes over style. And this comes down to the red team provider as well. We have to leave our egos at the door. There's no good us coming in against a kind of what we class as like a low maturity organization with limited SOC capabilities and like slow level threat groups coming in simulating like a nation state breach and going absolutely ham. It's kind of like, I guess, the expression of kicking the puppy at that stage. There's no point. No one's going to learn from it. If we breeze through an entire engagement, don't get detected, complete all objectives, and just sit there and go, brilliant, here's your report of how badly you've done, great, see you next year. No one learns anything from it, and it's a completely pointless exercise. We want to be detected, and within all the engagements, we factor in being detected. Like, we will go to a point, and if we do complete all objectives without being detected, we'll start again, we'll lower down our capabilities and go again till we hit that point where you are detecting us and you're having to take actions, because that's where the learning happens. Great, you've got a list of things you need to improve for the first run that you didn't detect us on, but here's where you detected us. Here's how your incident response procedures handled us. You didn't properly remove us from the environment, etc., etc. And then we can work to build training plans, improvement plans, and everything around that. So yeah, leave your ego at the door. Flashy isn't always best. Like, do what works for your organization. Questions on that?
The questions in the chat, Dom. I suppose, do you often find that that's planned up front sometimes, where you say a technical lead might be like, look, we want to detect you at X point to test maybe a specific group in the organization, or do you ever see that?
Sometimes, yeah. If people really want to just test their detection, we tend to recommend like a purple team. If you just want to focus in on detection, have your blue team working with us and going through set list of things. But normally throughout a red team, at some point, there will be detection opportunities. And it's down to us to then, evaluate how that comes across. But likewise, we also build in these scenarios in all of our engagements that we do escalate, or probably de-escalate, our capabilities to make sure we are detected, so we know what maturity level you start picking us up at. So yeah, we build it all in as we kind of go.
Great. All right, thanks, Dom. I think we're ready for the next slide.
Perfect. So now the scenario. So this is just really, really high level. Not going to go into like super granular detail about all the stuff we did. but it just gives you a quick fly through of like a couple of clear objectives, what the kill chain looked like, and what some of the outcomes were and learning points were at the end of it. And also some things as organizations necessarily don't consider. We're in kind of a funky state in the world where everything's going very cloud-based. People put a lot of focus on different areas, and all it can take is a gap in one spot in order to kind of open up us as an attacker being able to get to where we need to go. So client A, heavily invested in cloud security, done a really, really great job. Pretty much their process was moving towards cloud first for everything. Everything was pretty much a SaaS application, single sign-on, two-factor authentication. Brilliant. They had a local domain used kind of globally, different sites all around the place, which had kind of their workstations in, printers, local domain controllers, some file servers, things like that. So predominantly cloud-based organization. Their key business was a supplier of essentially SaaS platforms themselves. So when we're looking in the industry at the moment, I think something that comes up a lot, it's like supply chain risk. These guys obviously being a massive part of other organizations' supply chain, the kind of critical objective was compromising their CI/CD cloud pipelines, deploying all of these applications. If we were able to get to them and get into them, we'd be able to then breach other organizations using their applications, and everyone would have a very bad time. So this was kind of based around like APT29. So you can probably throw your minds back to things like the SolarWinds impact and some of the other breaches against things like Microsoft, in which threat actors get in, use local domains, use lower level privileges before moving to the cloud, and then look to exploit SaaS systems and deployment pipelines, etc., to get to where they need to go. And then the secondary objective, gain access to client management systems, a lot of high value clients, banking information, contact information, second stage attacks kind of open up at that stage. So simple, precise, concise objectives. And they really wanted to see if it was possible and what that risk would look like to their supply chain. So moving on, if it does move on, there we go. So as we talked about, the client had invested heavily in the cloud, but a lot of kind of lift and shift events had happened. So they were moving on-premise systems just to the cloud. So when we look at systems like virtual desktop environments, they basically moved on-premise versions of these into the cloud, just running as Azure VMs with small localized domains that they were accessing in there. Everything was federated and joined, and there was almost separate subsections of domains everywhere. So it was interesting. Although it was in the cloud, it was basically an on-premise deployment just on cloud infrastructure. So again, just because it's in the cloud doesn't inherently make it more secure as a baseline. So what we did here was basically, this was a full attack chain. So this is spread out over probably multiple months. So we gained initial access via sales, ironically. James, look at you. Straight in there via a malware dropper campaign. We took a great deal of time to build up a relationship. We compromised a local user and computer. From there, we established persistence, made sure we could exist on that host without being detected, and we started to do slow lateral movement and kind of enumeration of the internal domain. We had a nice quick win in terms of a certificate server being vulnerable, and this certificate server was used within a virtual desktop environment for their kind of internal authentication, which was great. From there, we found their federation server, their sync servers on one of their, two of their sites. Because we compromised their effectively their root domain, we could compromise the federation service, which is effectively their authentication control from on-premise to cloud. So in the same way we've seen breaches of things like Okta and various other authentication providers, once you control what deems a user as authenticated and not authenticated, you're going to kind of have a bad time. So at that stage, we were able to impersonate any user we wanted to and move up into the cloud as that user fully authenticated, bypassing multi-factor authentication. The theft stuttered through that one. And then we could then impersonate developer accounts, high-level developer accounts, and access the CI/CD pipelines via SSO, get into the CRM platforms, etc., and then go straight through. And then we were able to get into CI/CD pipelines. We found we could push changes that were almost auto-approved. So there was a bit of a problem there in terms of like the approval structure and how that went. And we completed all objectives. Great. Through that, there were also detections that they had, particularly when I think we compromised the ADCS server, there was a detection. and likewise some suspicious like location activity in terms of accessing as different users. In some cases, these events were closed as false positives. In other cases, investigations happened and even lockdown events happened, but the root cause analysis failed to properly get us out of the environment. So it was great to show those processes happening and pick up on where their shortfalls were. So yeah, great learning opportunities on that.
Dom, Dave Osborne writes, with regards to persistence, with a tool like sysinternals that displays auto runs likely to show that service?
So it depends on the method we're using for persistence. I could probably talk all day about different kind of methods we use. So in terms of auto runs being one of them, we also backdoor browsers, links, startup links, use things like DLL hijacking to hijack execution of trusted executables on there. We can backdoor Excel applications so that every time they run our payload. Depending, our persistence mechanisms we use will either be based on the threat intelligence we've been provided on how a certain threat actor operates, or based on how your organization works. So there's no good us doing a persistence mechanism that's never going to get triggered again. So we kind of do these. Should a good EDR tool find these? Yes. But EDRs are never a silver bullet. And that's what we find in a lot of these tests. People go, oh, we're paying for the best. We've got CrowdStrike, we've got X, Y, and Z, brilliant. They will never find everything. And the biggest kind of detection opportunities always happen around second stage. I don't know if you can see my laser pointer, but enumeration and lateral movement, that is where you will be picking up probably the most amount of activity. If you've missed this initial compromise, it's not a case of, oh, too bad, but it happens. You look at threat groups all over the place, using all kinds of different methods to bypass EDR. It will happen. It's not a case of if, it's a case of when. And when that does happen, that's when your detection capabilities kick in for the enumeration, because all threat actors will have to enumerate. They'll have to look to move. They won't stay on that one host forever. And it's detecting them at this stage. This is probably where they're most vulnerable. And then when they move into the actual exploitation phases, that detection and response really kicks in. So at those stages, yeah, you'd hope they did. And like I said, they detected our compromise of an ADCS server using the library we were doing. But again, weren't fully able to pin down exactly what caused it and whether it was normal actions. So the user obviously wanting to carry on with their life and do their work can't remain locked down forever. At some point, the SOC's going to have to release it. If they can't pin you down to where your initial ingress method was and your persistence method is, then we were able to come straight back in after that investigation. So yeah, hopefully that answers it a little bit. Cool.
Thanks, Dave.
Moving on.
Dom, sorry to interrupt. Dave's come back with another question, so I just wanted to jump in before we do move on. We use AD audit to review AD changes daily. Would these show your work?
Yes, potentially. So again, it's if they're shown as detected. I'm not familiar with AD audit, so I don't know fully everything it would show you. But potentially changes around, if you jump back one, changes around, say, minting of certificate services and things like that. If you've got auditing on that, and to be honest, in terms of locking down this, which is one of the actions we talk about in a minute, it was actually a technical control. It was a simple set of configuration changes that would have removed this element of compromise, which meant we would have had to find other ways to get to where we needed to go. So it can often be a mix of, if something's easier to implement just a technical fix, we'll always suggest that. And where technical fixes can't be implemented, that's where detection and response capabilities sit in that area. So it's likely you might have picked up some changes. Again, I don't know what AD audit shows in terms of certificates being minted. The takeover of ADFS, that was using legitimate accounts, so it's unlikely that would have been detected, as it was the service running this service effectively used to compromise that service. So once we start to blend in, it can become difficult.
Thanks, Tom.
No problem. Moving on. So, like I said, although they've done everything right in the cloud systems, all it took was kind of that local domain that hadn't been so considered. Like I said, they've been lifted and shifted from what they kind of had on premise to the cloud. They focused, really on locking down the cloud avenues. And technically, within the cloud, if you compromised a cloud user, there was almost no lateral movement paths we could see. So we very much relied on going to where the weakest points were and exploiting those weaknesses to get to where we needed to go. And like I said, with red teaming, we're always looking for that path of least resistance. We don't want to necessarily throw the latest and greatest exploit techniques or whatever, and quite often we don't have to. If we can find it in data, if we can understand how your system processes work and exploit them, we will. So the key outcomes and learning points they had, you can see they're probably quite different from what you'd get in terms of penetration testing. Probably the nearest you get within penetration testing would be the specific hardening of ADCS and ADFS. You know, there were clear technical controls they could do there, and we helped them implement them, made sure they work, retested those areas. But the rest of it around detection logic versus on-prem infrastructure, so how we were doing the enumeration, tools we were using to do the enumeration, network traffic, we worked with them to build what that looked like, put that detection recommendation within the report, helped to improve that. Instant response handling and procedures, again, for those hybrid environments, how we were able to laterally move using, say, minted cells, and also how they could improve that sort of root cause analysis of detecting us during those key areas. Additional things like email filtering. So in this example, the payload we managed to use was very new. It just started to pop up in white papers in terms of threat groups using it. And we were able to use that, and there was no filtering within their platform, and no one was kind of aware of it at the time. So that then implemented along with a few others they didn't know about at the time to offer some additional protection, which was great. At the end of it as well, followed up after the engagement was purple team exercise. So they'd gone away, implemented this new detection logic, done different things around, say, change control. In that purple team, we basically lifted and shifted a lot of the techniques we used, reran them in like a nice controlled step manner with a purple team. Could it be detected? Wasn't it detected? Why not? Etc. And try some variations. And it's always really, really nice for these purple team engagements. Once you've done a red team, to come back 6 weeks later, 6 months later, whatever, do those same attacks again, and even variations of those same attacks, and find them be detected. Because that's one of the best things we can do with that detection logic, is not training you guys to like detect specific tools, like, oh, here's the hashes for sysinternals that we used, go and detect them. It's okay, what are these tools actually doing? What are the network traffics and profiles look like, and how you can help detect them? And where sometimes things are incredibly hard to detect, trying to understand how your environment would detect them. So like I said, we work with third parties and providers to provide information, and also your internal teams. Again, additional detection around CI/CD workflows, change monitoring notifications to senior members of their team, and tighten change controls around DevOps pipelines to allow for additional authentication, and making sure people authenticating changes and pushes were those people, even if they're impersonated. So yeah, all in all, really good outcomes for them. Happy with it. We walk away happy, they walk away happy. So that's kind of the fly through of the summary of the scenario.
Thanks, Dom. I'll give you 10 seconds to pause and catch your breath. I've just thrown my email into the chat. So if you do have questions that pop up or come to mind later on, feel free to drop me an email. I'm happy to liaise with Dom. Or alternatively, if you do want to explore half an hour with Dom and maybe go into what red teaming could look like for your organization in a bit more depth, I'm happy to facilitate a conversation.
Perfect.
Great. Oh, Dave's come back with another question. Do you audit every customer first to understand where your best point to start is? That's a good question.
So within the kind of classic red teaming, there's actually on both points. So within a classic red team, there's an open source intelligence gathering and reconnaissance phase built into all engagements. And at this stage, what we do, again, depending on the timelines we have and the scopes and the rules of engagement, etc., we will build likely ingress paths, like what's the most likely attack chains to probably work against your organization. So by the time we've completed the reconnaissance and open source intelligence phases, we might have 3 or 4 approaches that will focus on within those initial access stages to then try and get working. If they fail, we build in step up or leg up, or like engagement steps to then move on to like an assumed breach, so that the engagement doesn't stop. We just say, you guys did exceptionally against these 4 scenarios externally, none of them worked, or, you know, it took 6 weeks for Frank in marketing to get back to our phishing email. So we had to move on, but towards the end of engagement, we might have interaction there, and then we go on to the internal. So with the threat intelligence led ones, our TI providers go through and do all of that phase for us. So what they do is go through, do full kind of like attack surface mapping, map it against threats in your sector, against your technology stack, against what you've got out there. And they provide us with basically percentage-based, high probability, low probability, mid probability events and scenarios that would apply to your organization. And then it's up to us, or me as the red team lead, to take those recommendations, develop them into actual attack plans, and then execute them. If that makes sense.
Thanks, Dom. There's a couple more questions, but I'll let you plow on with one or two more slides because I'm just conscious of time, and I'll post them towards the end.
Yeah, no problem. So last slide, really, from me, properly. What is the point of red teaming effectively? So red teaming, again, we really focus on testing what matters. We don't care about, I say care is probably a bad way of phrasing it, but there's so much noise you get with other testing approaches. So we really focus in on those key objectives, and those attack chains show impact and tangible impacts to those key services. And that's what we want to show. We don't want to leave you with a report at the end with 40 third-party patches missing on Chrome and whatever, and hundreds of TLS and SSL issues. Like, we don't care if we can't tangibly show an impact to our scenario, or how we got through, or how well you've done in a certain area, then we aren't going to focus on it. And again, it's about that path of least resistance. We're taking those realistic attack scenarios and evaluating the risk to your actual key systems. And the whole point of this, again, is that holistic view. So it will reveal how well your organization can detect, respond to, and in some cases recover from real world threats. So again, it depends on the scope of the engagement, depends what you're looking to achieve, but that's where we sit. We want to make sure not only have you got the technical controls in place and that they're working to certain levels, but also when those technical controls kick in or fail, or where investigations happen, that it is relevant, effective, and does its job. And again, the report and the provider as well should be using this to create learning opportunities that strengthen your teams, your decision making, your thought processes, and using that as a drill for your organization's protection to make sure you can protect yourself against these threats. And again, red teaming always shines when you input it into that continuous improvement cycle, taking those insights, taking that threat intelligence, turning it into realistic scenarios, assessing how resilient those services are and your key systems are against real threats. And then you'll see that kind of maturity and capability grow very, very quickly within your organization. And one of the bonuses is we come back and work with some clients year on year. They may start here, and the next year they're there, and the next year after that they're up there, and we have to continually upskill with them as well. So as a defensive teams get bigger and better, we have to grow with them as well and change our approaches, become better ourselves as well. So yeah, it's a constant game of growth and cat and mouse. And that is pretty much it. I will leave you with a final, in my opinion, inverted commas, red teaming isn't a luxury or an add-on. It's a proper standalone service these days. It's something that a lot of organizations, it used to be very much restricted to enterprise, but now everyone's kind of thinking, ooh, actually, seeing how we respond to a real threat is great. We've probably got vulnerability management systems. We've got Nessus running all over the place. Let's actually see how a real world scenario plans out. So it's a critical part of building a mature, modern, adaptive, and threat-driven security capability. If you plan an engagement well and really invest in that planning, run it with purpose, you'll get some awesome outcomes, hopefully, and that will really help to drive kind of meaningful progress within your organization. And that's what we're here to do. So yeah.
Tom, thank you so much. On behalf of everyone, thanks for taking us through that. I've got a couple of questions that are coming in, so I'm going to try and fly through these as quickly as we can because I'm conscious of the time. Shane Bissell says, "What's the most common vulnerability that you tend to come across?" Is the answer to that sales?
Uncontrolled data.
Okay.
Us as red teams, I think we spend 99% of our time being like dumpster divers, going through your SharePoints, going through your documentation, going through how you do things, understanding how your business works, and then finding exploits within that. So we don't often use off-the-shelf vulnerabilities a lot of the time. Once we're in, we're often acting as a user with real access. So it's a case of seeing what that user can access, what can we do with that information, how we can apply it. And then if there are, actions for vulnerabilities, then we do use them. I think like ADCS is something we see a lot of as well at the moment, but I think people are getting more and more switched on to that as that's picked up in penetration testing as well. So yeah, I'd say securing data and secrets is probably the biggest.
Okay, thank you. Ian asks a really good question here, actually. Are red teaming exercises not out of date a month or so after, like a pen test? With new tech and new configs change happen weekly, I guess it's a point in time and in-depth learning exercise to improve process.
So, as with anything,
and then he goes on to caveat, sorry, Dom, to say, unless it's on a regular retainer.
So yes and no. Good strong answer there, Dom. Because of the ways we focus in on it, we're not looking at specific vulnerabilities that then might be patched by Microsoft the next week or whatever. Sometimes we'll find things that have been in environments and in organizations for years and no one's picked up on and no one's noticed that's weird, that shouldn't be that way or whatever. So because we're fundamentally, for a lot of the recommendations, they're not only just local quick fixes, they're procedural and organizational changes to approaches. It takes often a lot of time to implement them post red team, and then we come back and do it again. But at that stage, you should be more resilient. So, like I said, when we're finding lots of data lying about everywhere, within penetration testing, that isn't discovered, vulnerability scanning, that isn't discovered. But we go in and we find niche references in reports or out of date sysdocs that have been left lying around the place or backup copies of X, Y, and Z, and we use them in our attack scenario. That then shines the light on that. People improve their security in that area, lock down things, we come back in again. And then, yeah, there might be a new hot way of doing something. But realistically, we're about ensuring those fundamentals are done right. And things like detection and response, when we're teaching you the fundamentals of how tools operate, it doesn't matter that a red teamer next week releases a brand new way of doing domain enumeration, because it's always going to use LDAP. It's always going to use all these fundamental approaches. So if you're doing those fundamentals right and those building your detection rule sets properly, it should always remain relevant. If hopefully that answers it.
Yeah, I think so. Dave again asks, do you use latest CVE DB for holes to attack? And then he goes on to say, so the principle of POLP is key! Exclamation mark. Yeah,
practice of least privilege, I think. Yeah, always. We bang on about that a lot. Ensuring people have access to it, particularly like with the cloud environments, we see even more. Everyone's guilty of it. Share access to this quickly, share access to that. Oh, so and so's got access to this, who's got access to that, who's got access to this file, and it's in a SharePoint site and everyone's got access to there in that group. So ensuring who can access your data and where it is always really important. So yeah, practice of least privilege is always like a fundamental that people get wrong. And also network segmentation. Network segmentation is something we see a lot that people neglect, but is actually a really, really good way to lock down lateral movement. I think, what was the first question, James? CVE, something like CVEs.
Yes, give me 2 seconds. Do you use the latest CVE DB for holes to attack?
So yeah, again, if we find the use case for CVEs and like I said, published exploits, we will. In some engagements, we're given a bit more freedom, and the bonus of being red team, we can get more time. So, threat actors these days are really, really heavily looking into like VPN gateways, like perimeter firewall devices and things like that. So where we can spend time, we'll often invest effort to reverse engineer or develop exploits for certain key technologies that organizations may be using to get our footholds. But again, it's all situationally dependent. There's no one size fits all or one best way to approach things. So if we can use a CVE and get a quick win and not be detected, brilliant, we will.
Thanks, Tom. I just going back to what David said on privileged escalation, I think that's one of the most common questions or themes that come up in the sales team is people testing their privileged escalation config reviews. So I suppose just as a side takeaway, if you haven't got that in order and you haven't reviewed that lately, do get a pen test and check that out. I think we're done on the questions. I'll give sort of 10, 15 seconds if anyone else has got a a question. Just looking through if I've missed any. I don't think I have. Thanks, David. You've been super interactive. Thank you.
Also bang on time. That's a first for me.
Yeah, first for me as well. There's a QR code there again, and if you'd like to set some time up with Dom, a bit of free advice, talking about how red teaming could potentially benefit your organization, or if there's any other bulletproof services you might want to talk about. GDPR, information security, anything cybersecurity related, we are here to help. We've got a whole team of consultants here that are super knowledgeable. So please lean on us. And thanks again, Dom. I've been to many of these your talks, and every time I feel like I learn something new. So thank you so much. Guys, the recording of this will be available to everyone, so we'll send that out. Also, a final plug that Emily will kill me for if I don't mention. Bulletproof are hosting their a live event in London. We'll send out a couple of details about that. It's on 19th of June. It's a resilience briefing all around incident response and just broader cybersecurity. So if you can make it, please do, and we'll send out some comms about that shortly. Dom, thanks again. Thank you everyone for joining, and hopefully see you again soon. Take care.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thanks everyone. Take care.